Welcome to Slacker Sports Show.
Good evening, sports fans, and welcome to another podcast episode of Slacker Sports Show, where we discuss anything and everything you need to know about sports. Let us welcome in the co-host of the podcast, Mark. How are you, Mark?
Doing well. Sports world is up and going and pretty busy. Last week, I think I saw somewhere that it was the first day, maybe ever, that like the NFL, NBA, NHL, college football, they had like 5 different leagues and they're all going at the same time. So sports are definitely up and going, still with COVID precautions, but definitely starting to get busy in the sports world.
Yeah, and so I guess something that noticeably started just in the last week or so is NCAA football, and that's what we're going to talk about first. And then we're going to talk about the NBA playoffs and then finish with the NFL, who started last week as well. So let's get started with the NCAA. I know we talked about it last week in the podcast, some potential games that we wanted to see, and there was some upsets, and there was some games that I didn't see going that way. I don't know if you did, but there were some games that weren't really in the favor of the Big 12. They seemed to struggle this week. And then we'll go over some of the notable games for next week, and hopefully it's not like last week, because last week we talked about the Kansas and Coastal Carolina, which I thought it was going to be a close game anyway, just because it's KU. The two that I did not expect was Kansas State versus Arkansas State, and then Iowa State versus Louisiana. Did you watch the K-State game?
No, I just saw highlights, but I guess there was some good stuff in the running game, but again, losing to a cupcake early on doesn't look very good, and that's why K-State usually, even with Bill Snyder and now with their new coach, usually kind of schedule cupcakes early on to get the team going, get them on good footing, and to start out the season that way is not great with a loss to a team you should have beat easily.
Yeah, and so then Iowa State comes in ranked, and they were ranked last year, and they lost their first game to a cupcake team. And this year, same exact thing, Iowa State comes in ranked and lose to Louisiana. Now, I do want to note that Louisiana is now ranked in the top 25. So I don't know if it was necessarily a cupcake team, but I know from a Big 12 perspective that you're not supposed to lose to these teams. And so Iowa State losing out of the Big 12, Kansas State losing out of the Big 12, and then KU losing out of the Big 12. KU, I watched the whole game, and it just was kind of just a train wreck. Their defense just wasn't stopping anything. And then about the end of the third quarter, they started figuring it out. They were kind of switching quarterbacks in and out. And the third quarter, they kind of figured out who they wanted to quarterback. It just wasn't enough to make it a game and make a comeback. So, yeah, a lot to see, a lot to grow from in Kansas. And I don't watch a lot of K-State games. I don't know if they're just young or what's going on, but I feel like there was a lot of upsets in this week that wouldn't normally happen. Another team that got upset was Florida State, and they lost to Georgia Tech. And I knew Georgia Tech, with their offense and everything, they could kind of beat anyone. But the way they did it was basically Florida State didn't look like they knew what they were doing on offense. So I'm kind of interested to see what goes on if the bigger teams start to figure it out and we start seeing blowouts again. Because even the teams like Kansas State and Iowa State that aren't the best in the Big 12, they should be blowing out these teams. And you saw like Clemson, they blew out their opponent. Oklahoma blew out their opponent. So I wonder if just some of these lower teams need more practice than normal. I don't know if that's playing into it or not. But yeah, some of the lower big schools did not look very good this last weekend. And so some matchups that I'm looking forward to this week is number 17 Miami versus number 18 Louisville. And then we got number 14 UCF going against Georgia Tech, which I said earlier beat Florida State last week. So I thought that would be a good matchup as well. And then we got Boston College versus Duke.
Yeah, I'm kind of going back to what you're talking about with maybe some of these teams not beating who they should be. I'm not sure if that's a coronavirus thing or it's been a weird off season and you kind of got to get into the groove of it. May not be a great excuse just because some of these higher ranked teams are blowing people out. So I don't know if that's a a legitimate excuse for the lower ranked teams. But I think when stuff starts getting back to normal and maybe they're in the groove of the season, you might see some of these, like you said, mid-tier Big 12 or other conference teams kind of start to balance things out and maybe get back to what we expected. As far as the games you kind of pointed at as we're looking forward to for this week, I'd say Miami and Louisville sticks out to me the most. Miami down there for a couple years, not getting the success they wanted, and Louisville's always kind of hanging around. So out of these three matchups, I think that sticks out to me the most as the one that could be high scoring, could be close, could be like a 50 to 40 some game, something like that. But that's kind of what intrigues me the most out of this upcoming week. And it kind of looks like for our Big 12 fans in the audience, it's kind of, I'm not going to say a week off because there's a couple teams that play this week. But it's kind of a bye week for most of the Big 12. I think, let's see, Oklahoma State plays. Baylor's supposed to play. I think their game got postponed last week, so they play for their first game this week. But most of the Big 12, I think, is off this week and then gets started up with conference stuff next week. So a couple things to look forward to this week, and then on the Big 12, things to look forward to the week after.
And speaking about playing in conference, we just heard news. I don't know if it broke today or yesterday, but the Big Ten Conference has decided that they will start playing football on October 24th. So about a month away. So they're going to be about a month behind in the college season, I guess, so to speak. But they released a press conference, said that they were going to start their season up October 24th. So that's another power conference coming in. I believe the Pac-12 might be the only one still left on the outside.
Yep.
But so I honestly, I would really be surprised if the Pac-12 doesn't join now, just because the Pac-12 has so many schools in it that really could do something in college football. So the only thing is I don't know what's been going on with these teams. I don't know if the Big Ten Conference, if they haven't been practicing. I don't know if they've been practicing less or more or what's going on, but it sounds like they're coming back. And in the press conference, they said basically the daily testing and they have strong confidence in the latest medical information has led to their decision. And they've said that each team will attempt to play 8 games in 8 weeks, leaving no wiggle room during the coronavirus pandemic before the Big Ten Championship game on December 19th.
Yeah, and something that in this ESPN article I pulled up about Big Ten coming back that they pointed out, and I think we had talked about it on an earlier podcast, was how is it going to look and how are they going to decide teams going into the playoff? And different conferences will have different number of games. I think the Big Ten is on schedule. You might have said this already, but Big Ten's on schedule to play 8 games in 8 weeks for all their schools. I know Big 10 and some of the other, or Big 12 and some of the other conferences have already done longer schedules. And apparently with the College Football Playoff Committee and the College Football Playoff Organization, they haven't set any benchmarks yet for what teams have to meet. An example they brought up in this article was, well, what if Clemson or Alabama only play 6 games? They're the most talented teams in the country, but what if they only end up playing 6 games because of different things? How are we going to decide that? So I guess the College Football Playoff Committee hasn't set any guidelines yet, and they're kind of just going to wait and see how all this goes. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, and if they do set a number of games limit, or if it's just based off of rankings, what they do. Another thing that stood out to me on this article was how they're kind of evaluating this, and how they're kind of evaluating the severity of COVID on each campus. I guess the Big Ten developed what they call like a color-coded system. It's green, orange, and red, depending on severity. And sounds like if a team is in the green zone, which is like less than 2% of their players are positive, they can keep going. Orange, the orange tier, is 2 to 5% of their team has tested positive, and that's kind of you proceed with caution. And if their team's in the red zone, which is greater than 5% of their players have tested positive, they have to stop practice and competition for at least 7 days. So it'll be something to watch to see how each Big Ten team, what kind of zone they're in if you're a Big Ten fan, and if that could upset the next week's games. If your team's also kind of hovering around one of the levels and about to transfer to another one, how will that go? So Big Ten's got kind of something set up now and a return to play set up, but definitely a lot of questions still and a lot of things up in the air and a lot of things that could change by the time they get started up in October.
Yeah, and so usually in football you want to be in the red zone, but it sounds like in the Big Ten you don't want to be in the red zone in this case. So the next thing we'll talk about is the NBA playoffs and some pretty crazy things happening since our last podcast. I know we talked about the matchups and who we thought were going to make it there, and at least for who I thought was going to make it there, they didn't. So I guess one thing we know for sure is that the Lakers are in it. That we know they're in it. They're in the conference finals, and they beat the Rockets 4-1. I believe the Rockets won game 1, and ever since then the Lakers kind of just put their foot down, and the Rockets just couldn't. I mean, we knew going into it the Rockets weren't better than the Lakers. It was just whether or not they could shoot better than the Lakers. But it seems like the Lakers kind of just put their foot down, and the Rockets just didn't shoot good enough to keep them in games. So the Lakers beat the Rockets 4-1 in the series, and they have had 6 days off by the time the series starts. The other team that they're playing is the they were the underdog. They weren't supposed to win. The series was not in their favor, but they came back and won, and that's the Denver Nuggets. They came back and won in the 7th game, beating the Clippers 4-3 in the series. So now that we know that, it is the Lakers and Denver in the conference finals. What do you think, Mark?
I think this is a good matchup. I mean, I think everybody's wanting to see Lakers, Clippers. That would have had the most star power, but I think this is still a matchup of two teams that are pretty deep and could go 7 games again, honestly. Like you said, the Lakers beat the Rockets pretty easily, and the advantage there was mostly rebounding from what I picked up. In the last game between the Lakers and Rockets, I think the Lakers almost doubled the rebounding margin for the Rockets, so that can kind of spell out how that series went. And Denver just keeps fighting, and I think they've had 7-game series in every series so far in the playoffs. So they're definitely kind of running on fumes, I think, and that'll be interesting to see where they're at as far as stamina when they come back and have to play the Lakers, because like you said, Lakers will have almost a week off, and then the Nuggets only have 2 days off between finishing off the Clippers the other day and when the conference finals starts, which I believe is tomorrow, Thursday or Friday. But Denver will definitely kind of be the team that's had their foot on the gas for longer, and I don't know if they'll be kind of rise to the challenge or if they will be tired and Lakers will just blow them out. In my opinion, I think Denver has the deeper roster top to bottom, but the Lakers obviously have the star power up top with LeBron and Anthony Davis. So kind of picking your poison as far as what team you want to go with. And then, like we talked about, the Nuggets beat the Clippers, and everybody going into the season was expecting Clippers to face off with the Lakers in the conference finals and kind of be the battle of LA. And obviously, like you said, they got upset. So people have been talking about if they need to tweak their roster, if they just want to run it back with the same people. What are you thinking with the Clippers?
I don't know if... So I read something yesterday, and I don't know the source, so I can't quote it, but I read something that that Doc has lost more 3-1 series lead than any other coach in history, which is just kind of, well, one, it's weird that they keep stats like that, and two, I don't know if it's his problem or if, I don't know. I mean, if it happens multiple times, you would start thinking that, well, maybe it's the coach's problem. But you also look at the Clippers, and it's not like they are completely stacked like the Lakers. It's one thing if the Lakers lost right now. Like if they lost and they were up 3-1 and they ended up losing 4-3, then I feel like there would be issues because you have the players. I've heard people saying that, you know, basically that Doc Rivers needs to be fired, but even though he's done it multiple times it's not like the Clippers had a completely loaded roster like the Lakers, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know if they really need to make a lot of changes. I think, I heard that in the fourth quarter, they were just tired and they just couldn't shoot. And I mean, yeah, you can't shoot for a quarter, you're done. But that doesn't say anything about the other 3 games that they should have won to clinch the division. So I don't know. I don't know if, obviously, I don't think the Clippers are going to be able to contend with the Lakers unless they go out and either get someone, or maybe they trade, or someone, I don't know, someone they have that's playing on their bench really steps up. I don't know. I don't know if there's enough in LA for the Clippers to be able to contend with the Lakers, but I also don't think Denver will be able to contend with the Lakers. I think it might be maybe a 4-2, I would say, probably series for the Lakers. So they'll at least get in a couple games before they kind of take over. But I would be surprised if it goes to Game 7, just because the Lakers have kind of just manhandled every team they've played. And to be honest with you, if I was a Lakers fan right now, I would be super stoked, because you kind of got all the tough teams out of the way. I mean, you got Clippers, they're not there anymore. The Rockets, which I thought the Rockets might, put up a fight, they didn't do anything. And then you look at the Eastern Conference, and Milwaukee's out of there. And so, going into, I'm not saying it's going to be an easy ride, but this has to be the best situation for the Lakers to win that championship, don't you think?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of kind of national analysts say this is the kind of road they wanted to have going forward, and this is the easiest path for them. And I might disagree with you on the Clippers roster as far as what they have. I think they got a really good team, but they don't have a lot of room to maneuver going forward. They got those 2 big contracts in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and they got a lot of good role players, but I don't know if they really have enough to trade anybody. They traded away a lot of their draft picks to get Paul George, so there's not a lot they can really do as far as trading people to get better, I'm not going to say backup positions, but maybe some more role players. So I think the Clippers might have to run it back and go with the same roster. And I really like Denver, and I like their team. Jamal Murray's really stepped up in the playoffs and been a scorer for them, which I don't think a lot of people were expecting. So that could give the Lakers issues. I think this may go 7. I think the Lakers will still win just because they have LeBron and Anthony Davis. Denver, even though they have Jokic, even though they have Jamal Murray, they don't really have stars and guys who can just dominate a game like that consistently. So I think the Lakers will win, but I can see it being another 7-game series, which would be a pretty impressive run for Denver that I don't think a lot of people are expecting.
Yeah, and so to kind of talk about the big ones in LA for the Clippers, and I heard a lot of people saying that, was Paul George a good decision? And in Game 7, Paul George had 10 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. So in the biggest game of the season, he just didn't show up. And I don't know. I'm not a huge Paul George fan, but I mean, he's had good games. In game 6 he had 33 points, so it's like he kind of comes and goes, and for what they gave up for him and for what they wanted him to be, I just don't think he's been that. But you could say that same thing with the Bucks. I mean, yeah, they have an MVP, but is he consistent enough to get it done every night? And that's where I feel like we're kind of running into things, is you got your all-stars that every single night they're going to turn it on no matter what. You have that on Lakers. The Lakers have 2 of them, but I don't know. And Kawhi Leonard is a guy that can do it all the time. But Paul George, to me, isn't really a guy that I would consider a star. I would consider him really good, but I don't know. I just don't see him as being a star, and I just wonder, like you said, they don't really have the money to be able to maneuver and make trades and do this kind of stuff. But I just don't know if George is the best option they could have in LA. But I guess we'll wait and see if anything happens there. I'm sure they'll keep him. I'm sure they'll try to run it back and try to make a few adjustments here and there. But I would just say that Paul George is kind of well, I don't know if I would say he's not playing up to his potential, because I don't know how far his potential goes. I felt like he had those good couple of seasons, and then he's kind of moved around and been on some okay teams and not really ever been like the star on those teams. And, it's the same thing here. Now they got Leonard there, and he's the star on the team. And so I don't know if he's just always going to be a Robin, or if he's ever going to kind of prove that he is the star that he was those couple of years for the Pacers. And if he actually, I don't know, breaks out next year. Because if he broke out next year and had the same numbers that Kawhi had, I don't think the Clippers would have any problem pushing the Lakers, because they have that star power. I just don't know if Paul George can do it all season long. And he's kind of one of the people that I heard the story about, that he was just tired in the fourth quarter and his legs were tired and he was, missing shots he doesn't normally miss. So who knows? It's just all, hearsay and reading articles.
And with that, we'll move on to the East. The first game of the conference finals for the Eastern Conference was the other day between Miami and Boston. Miami won that one 117-114 in overtime, so they're up 1-0. And I am really starting to like this Miami team. I mean, I think we're both kind of like, yeah, they're okay. They got a really solid roster coming into the playoffs, but they've just been stepping up this whole time. And we talked about it the last episode, but a surprise, basically blowout of Milwaukee in the last round, and then getting off to a good start here in the conference finals. Biggest play in that game the other day, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the highlight already, but Jason Tatum for the Celtics was going in for a dunk, and Bam Adebayo, a really nice piece for the Miami Heat, a big up-and-coming player, young guy. He got a huge block with, I think it's like 8 seconds left, when Jason Tatum was going in for a dunk to seal the game, which has kind of been the tone they've had for a lot of these playoffs, just playing good defense, helping each other out, and kind of spreading the wealth, I guess. And on that note, they just kind of seem to get scoring from everywhere. I mean, Jimmy Butler, the star of Miami, was their third leading scorer last night, behind two guys that shouldn't be putting up as many points as they should. Goran Dragic, I think he had somewhere like mid-30s as far as points. And then Jay Crowder, who's been a bench guy for a couple of years now, he had scoring in the 20s. So your star wasn't even really your top guy. And if you can still win games against good teams without your stars having to perform to their absolute best every night, that's a good sign. And I think that's what's getting me excited about Miami, is that they spread the wealth. Anybody can score at any time, and it's kind of reminding me of Toronto last year, where, yeah, you do have a star, Kawhi Leonard for the Raptors last year, and then Jimmy Butler for the Heat, but you got guys who can score from anywhere. You got Bam Adebayo, you got Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, a lot of these young guys who can just be plugged into a game and shoot. So I'm really starting to get on board with this Miami team.
And yeah, looking at and coming into it, we kind of knew that they were kind of the same type of team. They all had that kind of one, I guess, star, but they had everybody else around them could play well and be kind of that guy that night. And as long as they have a couple of guys every night that come and play well, that they'll be fine. And that's kind of both teams. So like you said, Dragic had 29 points, and then Crowder had 22, and then Butler 20, and then Adebayo had 18 as well. So their top four guys, 29, 22, 20, 18. And then you kind of look at the other side as well with the Celtics. You got Tatum had 30, Kemba Walker had 19, Marcus Smart 26, and Brown 17. So they're very, very even scoring. It's not like LeBron James goes off for 40 and the next guy has 12 or 17. They're very even scoring, which makes it kind of even harder to guard, because anybody can shoot. So I think it's going to be a more entertaining series to watch the Miami and Boston series than it will be the Lakers and Denver. And that's just because I feel like the Lakers really have the upper hand. Whereas I feel like this Miami and Boston game will go to Game 7. It'll come down to the last shot, maybe even some overtime, something along those lines. Because, yeah, these teams are so evenly matched that it's gonna be a fun conference finals to watch these two teams go at it.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't really hit on Boston too much, but the one thing that kind of concerned me, like you said, they do have really kind of balanced scoring. They're relying on their guys that have got in there: Tatum, Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart, all those guys. But for Boston, their big guys are really seeming to struggle, and I think that's kind of been their weak spot throughout these playoffs, and I think it's something that Miami could take advantage of. Daniel Tice, who is their starting center, I believe. Tatum's power forward, and I think Tice is center. Only had 4 points in 35 minutes. So he's playing big minutes and not getting too much production. And then their other power forwards and centers on the bench, nobody else at either of those positions besides Tatum and Tice scored over 3 points. So that's kind of a concerning hole, and that's something that Miami could probably take advantage of, kind of play down low, kind of bully them down low and beat them up there a little bit. And I think that might be an area they could take advantage of Boston there.
Yeah, and looking actually at his stat line, he had 35 minutes played, 2 for 3, so he shot 3 times. And he ended up with a total of 4 rebounds. He had 6 fouls, so he fouled out. But the fact that he had 4 rebounds as a center is absolutely crazy to me. I mean, Tatum had 14, so, okay, he took a lot of the rebounds. But, 4 rebounds as a center, that just can't happen. I mean, you got people on the bench. You got the point guard Wanamaker. He had 3 rebounds and he only played 25 minutes. So 10 less minutes, he had 1 less rebound. I didn't really what you said made sense, and I didn't really look at it that way. But yeah, if they don't get anything from their center, I mean, eventually Tatum's going to have a bad game or off game. And, Miami goes up, say they won the first game. If Tatum has a bad game, game 2, now Miami's up 2-0, and it's not looking good for Boston. So yeah, I could definitely see that being a problem. And I don't know if they have, I mean, Ernest Cantor, he played 0 minutes. I don't know if he normally plays or, what he's doing. They do seem to have a lot of bigger guys that they play a lot more. They got Ojale as power forward playing 10 minutes, Williams 10 minutes, Cantor 0, and then they got Williams playing 11 minutes, and then they got a point guard. So I don't know. Most of the time it's their main guys, but they do seem to sub in for the center quite a bit. So I don't know if they know they have problems down low and they're just trying to plug and fill or what's going on. But you're right. If, he had 4 points and 4 rebounds in 35 minutes, and that just can't happen from a starter, in my opinion.
And we'll kind of move on from the NBA there and go into the NFL. Week 1 just finished up on Monday night. We had 2 Monday night games this last week. And we saw some surprising things, some things we expected, but some surprises. In week 1, one thing that stood out to me was the Kansas City running game. I think both of us as Kansas City fans were excited about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and people knew he'd be good, but I don't think anybody really expected he'd be carrying as big a load as he did in week 1. I think he had 20-some carries, if I'm right, for over 100 yards. And I saw one of my friends on Facebook posted something today like, who would have imagined that with this Kansas City offense already so good, that we'd have the top rusher as well. So it just makes an already scary offense that much better. And then something else that surprised me was Green Bay. They were a team that I think everybody knows is decent, and Rodgers can, maybe if he's not as good as he once was, but he can still play pretty well. Green Bay really came out strong and scored a lot of points against Minnesota, a division rival, and really looked good in week 1. I don't know if they'll be able to keep it up, but it's a really good start to the season. What surprised you in this first week of the NFL?
I think the biggest thing was that there was some stars that just never showed up. And when it comes to I look at fantasy points and stuff to kind of gauge how a player played or whatever. And there's some big fantasy stars that aren't showing up. And that was kind of the biggest surprise to me, is I figured these big stars would show up with less, I guess, preparation. And I don't know exactly how, I don't know if they've actually practiced less in the NFL or more, but coming out of preseason with no preseason games, I really expected the veterans to kind of have the upper hand on some younger players. So kind of like what you said with the running back in Kansas City. I mean, this is a brand new offense. He's never played a down against another opponent. And here he goes and just takes off out of the gate and destroys the defense. So then you see, people like Michael Thomas. Now, he did get injured at kind of closer to the end of the game, but he didn't show up. You got, Odell Beckham Jr. He's not showing up. You got a bunch of guys that I figured would kind of play well because they're more seasoned and don't really need to practice against other opponents. And I just didn't really see that. The Green Bay one didn't really surprise me, and I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast or if it was just talking to someone. But I was Green Bay has kind of always had that offense. It's like, yeah, they have Aaron Rodgers. They just don't really have, the pass catchers or whatever. Well, they got that in Devontae Adams, and they kind of have other people around. But what interested me after last year, Rodgers playing so bad, is he actually came out and said that he just wasn't on the same page with the head coach. And this year, through the offseason and all these Zoom meetings and stuff, he said he really understands what the head coach wants and what they can do with their offense. And I feel like that came out and that was exactly it. And they showed that, now they're on the same page. Now they're both excited. And so, yeah, I know when we went over their division, we kind of looked at Green Bay and was like, yeah, they should win the division, or they should, be up there, but they probably won't have an outstanding season. I really could see Green Bay, in the conference finals, in the playoffs, maybe even pushing for a Super Bowl, just because they do have Aaron Rodgers, and if he plays as good as we know he can play, then it's going to be scary. I do think my biggest surprise was Tampa Bay, and kind of coming into it, the star-studded offense, and they were gonna, we're going to win the Super Bowl this year, and they still might, give them some time. But I was really thrown off, and I watched the first 3 quarters of the game. I was really thrown off with how Brady was playing with his receivers and as a team, and kind of how he started, I wouldn't say throwing a fit, but how he started to get, I guess, angry and mad at his teammates. And I don't know. That's just not what I expected from your leader of your team. And yeah, I know he's, the GOAT because he wins all these Super Bowls, but it kind of makes you wonder, is this Tampa Bay thing going to work? Mike Evans ran a couple of routes wrong, and Brady let him hear it. Mike Evans is one of the best wide receivers in the league. I don't know. I just worry that maybe there's too many stars in this offense and not enough leaders. But that's probably the biggest surprise I had. Were you surprised at all by how Tampa Bay played?
A little bit. I don't know if I'm as high on Tampa Bay as everybody else. I think they're going to be good, but I don't know. Some people are pushing them for the Super Bowl, basically. I don't know if I'm there, but one point that was brought up this week, and I think is a pretty good point, probably with all the talent they have, is that in New England, and this could be a Bill Belichick thing, could be a Tom Brady thing, could be a little bit of both, but they basically took the first month of the season when those two guys were together and kind of used it like the preseason, kind of feel each other out, kind of feel what the team's going to be like this year, and maybe not do as well in the first month as everybody expects, but then by the middle of the season, by end of the season, they're really humming and they got a good roll. So I think that could happen in Tampa, and they may end up with a worse record than people think, but will be kind of rounding into shape as we get towards the playoffs. I could see that happening. But yeah, I was surprised about the struggles Tom Brady had. I think he threw a couple interceptions and just didn't seem like his normal accurate self. And it may just be, like I said, kind of feeling out this team, and with limited number of practices, that's kind of been a trend the past couple of years. less practices in the preseason, and then just with all this COVID stuff, even more restrictions. He may just be taking this first month or so to kind of figure out his team and how he wants to play this year. So will be something to watch if you're a Tampa Bay fan.
Yeah, and then to go kind of back to his old team, I was kind of surprised with how New England came out and won. Not that we thought that they were going to throw this year, but I didn't really expect them to win early on, honestly, because and I watched a little bit of the game, and they want to run the ball, and it's different because usually it's like, oh, we can run the ball, and if it doesn't succeed, we have Tom Brady to get us out of it. Well, they don't have that luxury anymore. They have Cam Newton, but it looks like what they're doing is they're going to run the ball until they're down, and Cam Newton will run the ball and get us a first down. I think that's kind of like how, at least what I took from it. I didn't really watch super hard, but just kind of from what I've watched in the first 3 quarters of that game, it kind of seemed like Cam Newton was the exact opposite of Tom Brady, but still getting the same thing done. So it'll be interesting to see if, New England kind of rounds out and see how they do this year. I don't think they're going to be a bottom dweller. I don't think they're going to try for the Trevor Lawrence pick, but we'll wait and see. Some of the stuff I expected, some of the teams that lost, it's like, yeah, well, they're just, not that good. I was kind of surprised about Houston in the Kansas City game. I really thought Houston would do better. And if you look at the score, it was like, what, a 15-point game or something like that. But it just really wasn't close at all. Like, Houston scored first, and then Kansas City scored like 34 or some unanswered points. And then Houston kind of got a couple touchdowns and extra points and stuff at the very end. And so I just was kind of surprised because I thought Houston was going to put up a fight. I was surprised, though, that David Johnson looks like he was his old self again. How he did when he was in Arizona. He had that 1 or 2 good seasons where he really rushed well, and then he fell off with the injury and then just never did anything, and then they trade Hopkins for him. And not that I'm saying that was a good trade, but at least week 1, he came out and showed that he could still run the ball. So it's not like they completely lost out on that pick when they traded for Hopkins. Week 2 games coming in. We got Atlanta at Dallas. I think that's going to be a fun game to watch. We'll go over who we think might have the upper hand in these later. Minnesota at Indianapolis. Baltimore at Houston, which I think will be a fun game, and then New England at Seattle. What do you got in those games, Mark?
Well, in the Atlanta and Dallas matchup, 2 teams that lost week 1 but were playing solid opponents, and they're both teams that we thought would be solid going into the season. So an interesting week 2 showdown against 2 teams coming off a loss, and we'll see what they can do there. I think Dallas has the deeper team overall, and like a lot of these teams, I think they may just be feeling stuff out, and could be kind of rolling by the time season hits the midway mark. Minnesota and Indianapolis. Minnesota last week, I wasn't, like you said, Green Bay's a good team, so I don't think we were as surprised that they lost week 1. Indianapolis lost to Jacksonville, though, which some people think may be the worst team in the league this year, so that was a surprise. But again, 2 teams coming off a week 1 loss and trying to figure out kind of where they stand. Baltimore and Houston. Baltimore had a great week 1. I don't think that surprised anybody. They came out and beat the crap out of Cleveland, basically. It's 38-6. And I thought that game would be a little bit closer, but Baltimore's looking like their team that they had back from last year. And then New England and Seattle, 2 teams that won last week, both look solid. So if I had to make a pick on these 4 matchups, I'd say I'd pick Dallas, Minnesota probably, Baltimore, and Seattle. Who do you have in these matchups?
So the Atlanta-Dallas game, I think, is going to be a lot of fun to watch, mostly because I'd have to look at his stats, but I think Matt Ryan threw over 50 times. He had over 50 pass attempts in that game to try to keep him in the game. And I don't think he'll have that type of performance against Dallas, just because Dallas, I feel like, is going to run the ball into the ground with Zeke and stuff. So I think it's going to be a fun game to watch, and I think Atlanta might come out with the win. I mean, it is at Dallas, but I don't even know if home field advantage matters anymore without fans. Minnesota and Indianapolis, and the Indianapolis game made me almost want to cry, not because I'm an Indianapolis fan, but because of how well they were kind of playing, but still weren't scoring. And so during our podcast, when we were talking about Indianapolis, we were talking about their quarterback play. And I thought that they're getting a better quarterback than, not necessarily than what they've had in the past, but the last couple of years with injuries and everything, they've had a second or third string quarterback as their starter. And so they went out and they got Phillip Rivers, and I thought, hey, Phillip Rivers he throws a lot of interceptions, but he's still a good quarterback. I just think that, he's made bad decisions, and maybe he doesn't have the wide receivers that he once had with the Chargers. Well, he kind of proved that, hey, he can run this offense. It looked really good, like the first 3 or 4 drives, and then Phillip Rivers just started throwing interceptions again and lost him the game. So it was rough to watch, and not because I'm an Indianapolis fan, but just because I kind of hoped that Phillip Rivers would figure it out and this Indianapolis team would be good. But nope, he's still the old same Phillip Rivers throwing interceptions. So got to go with Minnesota there for sure. Then I'd go Baltimore over Houston, just because I wasn't impressed with what Houston did against the Chiefs. And then New England at Seattle. I got to go Seattle. I just think Seattle's a more complete team than New England. And I'm interested to see kind of how New England will continue to play. I feel like they play good enough to win, but I don't know if they could play well enough in like a shootout type of thing. And I feel like Seattle's offense could put up a lot of points quickly, and I don't know if New England could keep in a game like that like they used to with Tom Brady. I mean, they used to be able just to kind of stay in games because Tom Brady could score points whenever needed. But I don't think that's the thing in New England anymore with Cam Newton, so I don't think they're going to be able to last a shootout with Seattle. So I guess kind of some things going into this week, and noticeable injuries have already happened in week 1. It usually always happens. It just seems to be more, I would say, big name-ish so far. Usually there's injuries that happen, but there's maybe 1 or 2 big names that kind of go down with injuries. But some of the big names are Marlon Mack. He tore his Achilles tendon, so he's done for the year. We got Michael Thomas, who has an ankle injury. Not sure if he'll be back or how long he'll miss. And then some big names besides Thomas, Le'Veon Bell, who has a hamstring injury. He's now on the IR, so he's not going to be playing. James Conner injured his ankle. Don't know how long he'll be out, but it doesn't look like he'll be on week 2. Then we got George Kittle, one of the top tight ends in fantasy, not going to be. I've heard both. No, he's not going to be able to play. I've heard, yeah, he'll play. So we'll wait and see. So far, he's questionable with a knee injury. And then on the same team, we got Deebo Samuel, who's supposed to be one of the best wide receivers for that San Francisco team. And he injured his foot, and we'll wait to see how long he is out for. So some pretty big name injuries out in week 1. Do you think it could possibly be because they didn't have preseason games? This season's a little weird, or do you just think, injuries happen normally? It's just 2020.
I'm probably leaning more towards it's just injuries happening, and I think these guys are working out all summer. They got their own personal gyms, that stuff. So I don't know if COVID's impacting their workout regimen or training regimen as much as it would for you or me. So I don't know if the practice thing or kind of training is really as much to blame. I think it's just kind of a freak thing that all these big names are going down at once. We did talk about fantasy a little bit. For some of these guys going forward, you can kind of see an impact on fantasy. I know Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor were both kind of supposed to split time at running back for Indianapolis. I think Jonathan Taylor is basically going to be the guy. Now they have Naheem Hines, who's going to come in too, but I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be more of the guy there. Michael Thomas, he might go out and see if he can get some of the other Saints receivers I think he's going to be out a couple weeks, so he might pick up some of the other Saints receivers there for a couple weeks. James Conner, I think Juju Smith-Schuster might also be kind of banged up. I don't think he's supposed to miss anything, but might watch Pittsburgh offense and see how they do, and might pick up some of their backups if you think they're going to be out for a long time. George Kittle, like you said, we've heard conflicting reports. I've heard, and I think that was a report that was coming from their head coach, that hasn't been practicing, but they plan on him being back. So he should be probably coming back this week or at the very latest next week. But if you're starting fantasy, like we talked about, if you're just starting fantasy this year, very important to pay attention to injuries and who the backups are, what direction these teams are going, who they're playing, how long people are out. So definitely something to watch as both a fan of these teams and a fantasy person. Need to be watching injuries and kind of how long people are out.
And so I know we didn't really rehearse this or say anything before this episode started, but if we drafted our teams, you drafted your team, I drafted my team. Who were you most surprised by on your fantasy team this week? I'll go first while you look yours up. But I would say, so my fantasy roster in our league is Russell Wilson, Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin, Dalvin Cook, Chris Carson, Mark Andrews. That's my starters. I got some guys on the bench as well. And then I got New Orleans defense, which, by the way, scored me 17 points. Thank you. And Greg Zuerlein. And the biggest thing I saw was, now, the Russell Wilson game was a complete shootout. He threw for 322 yards and 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. But the biggest, besides Michael Thomas not playing well because, he's a big receiver, and the fact that he only scored like 4 points from 3 receptions and 17 yards, the biggest one I was kind of like crazy about was how good Chris Carson played in that offense. He only had 6 attempts, 21 yards, but he had 6 receptions for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. And for a running back, you're used to seeing 12 attempts for 50 yards, 60 yards. And Chris Carson, I picked up not because he was a pass catcher, but because he was supposed to be their kind of leading rusher. And he's kind of proven to be that all-around back, which is good because that means that not only will he just be out there on first and second down to run the ball, but he's going to be on third downs because he likes to catch it. And so I would say that was kind of a happy thing to see, that he only had 6 rushing attempts, 21 yards, but he still had 6 receptions for 45 yards and 2 touchdowns. So now that you've had time to look up your roster, who are you most excited about, or I guess who you didn't see doing well and did, or someone that you thought would do better that didn't? Who do you got, Mark?
Yeah, I'll go through kind of my starters and my bench as well. I have Josh Allen at quarterback, Tyreek Hill wide receiver, Adam Thielen wide receiver, Marquise Brown from Baltimore is my third starting wide receiver this last week, Saquon Barkley at running back, Aaron Jones at running back, and then George Kittle at tight end. On the bench, I have Calvin Ridley, Jonathan Taylor, Marvin Jones Jr., Darren Waller of the Oakland Raiders, their tight end, Cam Akers, the rookie running back for the Rams, and then Aaron Rodgers was on the bench for me last week. Kicker, I have Bailey from Minnesota Vikings, and then Chicago. Defense is who I had. Some surprises, kind of good and bad for me. Josh Allen had more points than I figured he would. I kind of banked on him. I picked a quarterback later than most of the rest of people in our league, so I'm kind of banking on him being a surprising fantasy contributor again. And I saw somebody say this online, that you kind of got the full Josh Allen experience this last week. He probably had more passing yards than usual, but threw a couple interceptions, had a couple passing touchdowns, but you got that running edge with him, so that was nice to have from him. Adam Thielen, number of points I got from him was surprising. I think I said this in our NFC North Division Preview podcast, but he's going to be more of the man this year as far as their receivers with Stephon Diggs gone. So he had 31 points for me there, so that was nice. Saquon Barkley, that was kind of on the negative end, and I think that was mostly just they're playing against Pittsburgh, playing against a good team, and he really never got the rushing attack going. He rushed it 15 times for only 6 yards, so that wasn't great. He did okay in the passing game, but really couldn't get his running game going. Calvin Ridley was on the bench for me, so that was a big whiff for me. He had almost 34 points, so that hurt. I mean, I still won, which is nice, but he would have made the margin even bigger, so that was a whiff on my part. Aaron Rodgers had a lot of points on my bench, but I had Josh Allen starting, so it actually didn't end up being that bad of a whiff for me there. Chicago's defense really disappointed me. Only got 3 points out of them, and that may be something I look for a new defense going forward. Some things for this next week that'll probably be kind of tweaking. Like we talked about, Jonathan Taylor is probably going to be taking on more of a role, so I'm moving him up into the starting lineup this week. Calvin Ridley, moving him up. Switching out Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers, and that's something I might flip-flop back and forth between by the time Sunday comes around. And I think that's about it. My defense should do better. Chicago's playing New York, so I guess I kind of have two players going against each other there, so may switch up the defense. But a couple switches for this next week, and hopefully I can still come out of week 2 undefeated, and it will be fun to watch how all these players kind of develop going forward.
Yeah, so in our league, I thought it'd be fun to kind of just talk about our league as we go throughout the season. And in our league, we both won, so that's good. I scored the most points in the league last week with 161, and you scored 145 points, and you won as well. So both of us doing pretty good so far. There's still a lot of season left. It could go bad very, very quickly, as you saw in week 1, you get a guy like Le'Veon Bell or even Michael Thomas, who is a first-round pick for me, and now he's injured for 3 weeks. What am I supposed to do at wide receiver with who I got? So it could change very drastically, very quick, but I think it's fun if we go through and kind of talk about moves and talk about how we played and decisions we made. It kind of just liven up fantasy football for someone who doesn't normally play fantasy football.
Yeah, it doesn't look like too many people have made moves yet as far as dropping people or kind of any trades or anything. I think most of the time in our league, you kind of let it play out for a couple weeks there and see how things go, and then start maybe making some trades or picking people up. I think the only move that I've seen being made is somebody dropped Christian Kirk, wide receiver, and picked up a kicker. So I think that's pretty. Rosters are staying pretty steady right now, but like you said, it was a interesting week 1, and we'll see how things shake out going forward. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hope you guys come back and listen next week. We appreciate you guys listening, and would love for you guys to subscribe if you haven't yet, wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you're listening to them on Apple, Spotify, on our YouTube channel, you can subscribe there. Just make sure you're subscribing so we get there every week and are in your podcast feed or your YouTube kind of updates there. If you want to find our YouTube channel, it's Slacker Sports Show. You can just search that. And then if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can get updates there as far as the podcast when it comes up. If any sports stories come out that we feel like we should share with you guys, you can find us at Slackers Sports on Twitter.